Hello, everyone. Welcome to another 2023 FallDocs screening. My name is Armando Sarmudio, and I am the Public Programs and Events Coordinator here at IDA. For our blind and low vision attendees, I'm going to identify myself. I'm a light-skinned Mexican American wearing a gray sweater, glasses, and standing in front of a white backdrop. Thank you to our media sponsor, KCRW, for sponsoring our 2023 FallDocs. This evening, we'll have a conversation between Deadline editor Matt Carey, director Sarvnik Kaur, and producer Koval Bhatia, whose film Against the Tide premiered at Sundance 2023. To see more amazing films like this, please visit www.documentary.org/FallDocs. Now, before we get started, I would like to offer a brief land acknowledgement. We recognize the Gabrielino Tongva as the past, present, and future caretakers of the land, water, and cultural resources in the unceded territory of Los Angeles. Thank you so much to Andrea Lust for ASL interpreting this discussion. And with that, I will pass it on to Matt. Thank you.
Welcome to this discussion of Against the Tide as part of the IDA's FallDocs series. I'm Matt Carey, documentary editor at Deadline.com. And for our blind and low vision attendees, I am a white male, sitting before a red wall background wearing a flower print shirt, and I have a light beard. So pleased now to be joined by the filmmakers of Against the Tide. We have with us the director, Sarvnik Kaur, and producer, Koval Bhatia. Welcome.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, I'm Sarvnik Kaur, brown Indian middle-aged woman. I'm wearing round glasses against a white backdrop. I have 3 dots on my head, which is called bindi in India. And I'm so pleased to meet you all.
Hi, I'm Koval. I'm a brown South Asian woman with curly hair, wearing a green scarf around my hair, sitting in front of a green wall with colorful plates gifted to me by Sarvnik. And I'm very happy to be here.
How did you meet Rakesh and Ganesh, your 2 protagonists of this story?
Oh, thanks for the question, Matt. So I was making this film for 6 years. It took a long time into the research. When I started out, I was actually doing my first film in Kashmir in India. And that's when I started to hear stories coming from Bombay, which were about Kolis getting displaced from their ancestral villages. Kolis are the indigenous people of Bombay. And I started to think, well, displacement happens everywhere in this country. In Kashmir, it is in the name of nationalism, and back home in Bombay, it's in the name of development. So the cost for supposed collective good does not take the individual into account. I came back and I lived next to a Koli village. I've lived here for about 15 years, ever since I moved to Bombay. I was curious. I wanted to know what's happening. And I started working with a Koli fisherwomen's collective who were trying to put up a resistance against the municipality corporation, who were trying to build their 175-year-old fish market was going to be turned into a mall. And so they were setting up this resistance. And I started making small videos for them. It was during this work that I was doing with them that I was invited to the home of one of the women who was part of the collective. And that's when I met Rakesh. Rakesh was this amazing aspirational person for me. We went fishing in the shallow sea. We caught fish. We came back. We cooked it. We ate it. And there was this really quiet pride about him. He said to me, the first thing was that a Koli man will never go hungry. All I have to do is step into the sea and I'll find fish to feed my family. And it took me 4 long years to understand the wisdom behind those words, the value of what he was saying. And while I was making those resistance videos for the Fisherwomen's Collective, I was getting this sense that Bombay is really busy. People have concerns, which are, and everyone's got their own survival struggle. So, when people are sloganeering and people are out on the streets, it's almost as if nobody cares. And it was during one of those protests that I saw Ganesh. And Ganesh wasn't saying language of protest. He was talking nautical miles. He was basically saying that Kolis are the protectors of Bombay. Without them, the mangroves would be cut off. The sea would basically drown the city. And that's for the first time I realized that actually I'm not making a film for the Kolis. I'm making a film for people like me, city dwellers who actually live on these mangrove reclaimed areas. And as luck would have it, I think that this film has been made by documentary gods, not by me. As luck would have it, I'd gone to meet Rakesh, and there I saw Ganesh sitting there drinking and eating fish. And so started our friendship. Over the next year and a half, we would basically drink copious amounts of whiskey, eat a lot of fish, where I would see them debate, argue, talk, get up in a huff, swear never to talk to each other, and then only to be back together again in a few days. And I started to see, well, this could be the backbone of my film. This could be a story of friendship, a story of love. And that's how this film actually came into being.
And Koval, so when you're making a film over a period of such a long time and it's observational, by its nature, when you start, you don't know where it will end, how it might end. What did you imagine as it evolved of how the story might resolve in some sort of narrative arc?
Thanks for asking, Matt. I think it really helped that because of the way that we approached Ganesh and Rakesh and the story, I think it became very clear how the story was going to end. As Sarnik says, that the documentary gods did indeed shine upon us. And at some point, as we were following them, the pandemic happened, a lot of things changed. And then both the brothers were expecting babies. And it was this beautiful kind of arc that formed itself, which was that our film was starting with the baby naming ceremony of one child, and somewhere at some point Sarnik realized that the most beautiful way to kind of finish this arc is to end it with the baby naming ceremony of the other brother's child. And yeah, I think it became very clear as we were shooting that the story had a very neat beginning and end in a very poetic sort of way.
There's such an intimacy to the way that you made the film, and I feel like it implicates the audience in the moral and ethical decision making of these two main protagonists, Rakesh and Ganesh. Did you have that feeling in edit, Sarnik, as the film was coming together?
Matt, it's really interesting because I think the loyalty or the privilege that I had as being a witness to their lives, there was something in me that kind of knew how the story was going to pan out. On the edit, actually, the editor did not agree with me, which took me quite a lot by surprise. He was looking for an antagonist. He was looking for a villain. And to me, the beauty of this film was that there is no villain, there is no good and bad, there is life, and life has to be led. It commands, a person moves as life commands it to move. So it was a period of about 9 months of really trying to make my editor understand why Rakesh is aspirational. The kind of collaboration that I'd had with Ganesh was basically not letting me view him as an antagonist, as a villain. I never shot him like a villain. When a great story from behind the scenes is that I was kind of from the beginning knew that Ganesh was sitting on this moral dilemma of whether to LED or not to LED, and I knew that the process of following him was going to be, what does it take for a person who knows the implications of using a technology like this, and what is that push that comes from life, how life twists his arm into doing what he needs to do. I knew that he was steadily going bankrupt. With every fishing trip that he was making, he was taking a bigger loan and a bigger loan, and he was going farther into the sea in the hope that he'll catch more fish. It was when he heard that his wife was pregnant, that's when the decision was kind of made for him. On one hand, his house, which the only thing that he knows, his property, that was going to be taken away from him because he hadn't paid the bank loans. On the other hand, his wife was pregnant. So I think during the edit, having been privy to such gut-wrenching moments in life when decisions are not really, choices are not really in your hand, they come almost ready-made. It's almost like, you get to see the invisible hand of the times that we're living in and how that's making choices for the people. And that was my commitment to really the story and my two characters, that here in this film, we will basically see how times decide things for us, times decide the matters for us.
And Koval, perhaps you could talk about the conditions there. Sarvik mentioned development as being a major issue in Mumbai, but clearly there's also for the fishermen, there's climate change, there's depletion of ocean stocks. So there's a whole series of immense challenges going on that threaten this a kind of traditional way of life.
Yes, Matt, you're right. And I think one of the things that we found out very early on, which kind of further made us realize the urgency of this film, is that, like the scientists have now declared that the Arabian Sea is the fastest dying sea in the world. There are these algae blooms forming all over the sea.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it's sort of reached a place where things are very worrisome. And you get to see bits of that in the film, where you suddenly have literally every time you throw the net, there's either no fish or there's tons and tons of plastic and jellyfish. So in a way, I mean, the Kolis are threatened from every way, because there's obviously land encroachment and development. There's the climate change, which is making the water temperature rise. You have fish patterns have changed entirely. And in the middle of all of this, there's also this conversation around sustainability. And I think what Sarnik and I used to talk about is, like, at some point one has to ask the question, on whose shoulder does this burden lie on? Does it have to lie on this burden? Does it have to belong to the people who are anyway the most marginalized, who are constantly pushed in a corner by every which way? So, Sarnik, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Absolutely. And also the other question, which I thought was very interesting from Ganesh's point of view, was who has the right to ambition? Is a person who is from the indigenous community from Bombay, does he not have the right to push forth with his ambition? Does he not have a right to have a good life or aspire for a good life? What does it mean to have a good life? And those were really the value systems that we were raised with. As kids, I remember my mother talking constantly about learn to be satisfied, learn to be satisfied. And as I grew older and in my professional life, I realized that actually satisfaction is an impediment to growth, or at least that's how we think about it. So, here there were two characters who literally for me stood for one old way of life, where life is always going to be hard. You have to find those moments that make it beautiful and enjoy them. And on the other hand, there is this struggle, struggle to do better, get more. And that literally comes from the fact that you need to acquire wealth and power if you need to survive. Survival is almost equated with wealth and power. So, there's this new way of life or new way of thinking where a human being's always got to struggle. And then there's another beautiful way of thinking, which is where life is always going to be hard. We have to learn to enjoy the moments that have been given to us. And that for me became a very beautiful underlying emotional study almost into how we are as a society.
Yes, I think that's what makes your film so universal, because these questions are absolutely relevant, say, to American life. And I think many other countries as well. I can speak a little bit more to American life, but it actually, as you were speaking, it made me think of, I think it was a quote attributed to Chief Seattle of describing a sort of mentality, if you will, of non-Indigenous people in the United States, where, you know, they are pursuing so many of the goals that you just talked about of enrichment. And he said that was the end of living and the beginning of surviving. And curiously, I think most Americans think of it in the exact opposite way, that if you're just, you know, say living off the land in a way, well, that's surviving. And yet there's that kind of paradox. Maybe that actually is living. And I say, those of us who are ambitious in the way you're describing, maybe we're just surviving. Anyway, you know, your film put me in mind of those really central questions about how we live our lives.
Absolutely, Matt. I also feel like fear is such a is such a baggage that the modern man carries. You know, there is this is what I meant by when Rakesh said that a Koli man will never go hungry. You know, his belief in the fact that he will be taken care of, it just doesn't come only from the sea. It's also the sense of community. When Dhera, the little boy, was born, that boy was never at home. He was at this neighbor's house and at that neighbor's house. It was almost like the entire village was raising the child. You know, the entire village was invested in his well-being. And that's the kind of love or security that Ganesh had lost in the process of, you know, he got alienated from his community at certain point. As soon as he moved out of the community, he lost that safety net that he always had. And with that, his peace of mind. With that came the struggle, the fear of when you're alone, how will you manage?
Well, how would you just describe Koli culture?
I feel like Savnik's better place to answer that. Sitting right next to him. All I can say is like I can just say that I also live right next to the sea, and there's different Kolis. So Kolis are essentially a fishing community spread across India, and there's different regional Koli communities spread across, and they are basically, as Sarvan described earlier, the protectors of our coastline. They are the ones protecting the mangroves, the land, and they mean very, very, very much to all coastal lands in India.
Matt, just to answer that question, you know, this idea of going against the tide is not a Koli idea. They know how to harvest the currents. So Kolis, the shallow water fishermen, they fish 4 times a day. When the tide is rising, they go to cast the net. And when the tide is falling, they go to pull the net out. And in this way, they know how to harness the currents of the ocean. You know, when the tides kind of go through the net, the fish will get caught. So for a very, very long time, ancestrally, they've known there's no point fighting nature. And I'm not trying to oversimplify things over here. There's a certain, and there's a beautiful anecdote that I'd like to share with you. There was a cyclone happening in Bombay, and the sea was raging for 2 days, and I didn't have access to Rakesh's village. So after the cyclone had kind of calmed down, then after 2 days, I went to visit him, and I see Rakesh really tired, lying on the bed, and his mother's there. And he tells me that he was in the sea for 2 days in his boats, dumping the rainwater out of the boat so that his boats won't drown. And here's a mother who's saying, I knew my son was going to be all right because I saw a white horse with wings standing on top of my roof. Now, this may sound superstitious to some, but you know, the faith, the belief, it kind of translates itself into these anecdotes. It just has an anecdotal value for us, but for them, for the mother, for Rakesh, there is a certain kind of peace. They are at peace with the fact that life takes its course. Life and death, illness and happiness, they are all a part of being human and being here on this planet. And that's something I would say underlines for me, that anecdote really underlines for me what Koli culture to me means.
And we see the scene of Rakesh going out in very rough seas. And there's the discussion beforehand of like, well, should you go out? And it's like, well, actually, the fishing's good at this time if you go, but clearly there's some danger. But that scene and just the entire film is so beautifully shot. And you talk about the approach to the photography of Against the Tide.
Absolutely. So, Matt, I think from very beginning, the idea was to tell this story in a way and form where the distance kind of melts away. When we talk about climate change, I don't know why, but we imagine as if it's someone else's problem. It's the
Mhm.
farmer's problem. It's the fisherman's problem. Here, I wanted to really put climate change in a way and form which is lived through the people who we are living their lives with over a period of 97 minutes. And in terms of our cinematography, that was the approach we were going to take. It was going to be deeply observational. It was going to be said in a way where the story goes under your skin, where you remove all these barriers of, oh, exotic backdrop, oh, fishermen, oh, the sea, oh, we don't know this culture. All of those walls should start to crumble down, and the challenges in their lives should be so deeply felt. It's as if you're there, as if you cannot close your eyes to this thing called climate change, which is affecting all of us. It's just that we stay so far removed from nature that we don't actually feel it coming.
And just a shout out to Ashok Meena, our amazing cinematographer, who I think really like gave more than we could have possibly imagined into. He would literally jump into any situation that was asked of him, including that scene with Rakesh you just mentioned.
Yes,
Absolutely. Sometimes with Ashok, it was like we would be on the boat and I would see him start to take off his clothes and jump after Rakesh, or just take off his clothes and and there's the net and he wants to get a closer shot of the net. And we didn't have the best of equipment. This funding this film, the money came kind of slowly. It was a long drawn project. So just to have that kind of a team which was really resonating with what we were trying to do. And just that Ashok and his love for making the perfect frame, I think we were blessed to have him.
Yeah, and speaking of your team, you mentioned the editor Atanas Georgiev. I may be pronouncing his name incorrectly, but he's a brilliant editor and, of course, worked on Honeyland, which earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Documentary from North Macedonia. And there's certain parallels between those two films for members of the audience who have seen Honeyland, which is, again, a kind of presentation of a radical, almost radical, if you will, orientation towards life, where the character in that film and character is just so integrated into nature, if you will, and raising wild honey. And how did you become connected and collaborate with Atanas?
We were a part of the Hot Docs Accelerator Lab, and I was looking for an editor, trying to find one, and I'd loved Honeyland. I had some ideological differences with the film. I thought, which was the first thing we discussed when I met Atanas for the first time. And I asked him, why does the narrative have to be so simplistic? Why does there have to be an enemy who comes from the city, dangling this carrot of money? And we really went in depth into having this discussion about, we want more nuance to our film. We want, our characters to not have those shades of absolute black and absolute white, because life isn't like that. So I loved the film Honeyland, and I think the reason for going to him was this continuum of time that he'd made in the film in Honeyland was the continuum of time that I was aspiring for while I was filming it. And I just saw in him that person who identifies moments. He has a very sharp eye for moments. So he'll be watching the rushes on speed, and then suddenly he'll pause and he'll see that one frame that he'll be like, yeah, this is going into the film. So it was a meeting set up by our mentors at the Accelerator Lab, and that's how we ended up working together.
Kova, can you talk about documentary filmmaking in India now? Obviously, there's a tremendous cinematic tradition in India, and then it's well known, certainly in the fictional narrative space. Long tradition, I believe, in nonfiction filmmaking as well, but it's mostly been in recent years where I think people say in maybe Europe and the United States are becoming aware of some extraordinary films coming out of India, and 2 Oscar nominations in the past 2 years for All That Breathes, and the year before that for Writing with Fire. But it's really some exciting work coming out of India that now other parts of the world are getting to experience.
Thanks for your question, Matt. I think first, I always like to preface with saying India has an equally rich, amazing tradition of nonfiction filmmaking. I think it's just we've been overshadowed by Bollywood because of its very, very sort of big, colorful, spicy energy. But of course, there's been amazing cinema, and we stand here because of the work that they put in. That's a preface that I feel like everybody should know. But at the same time, I think it's really great that suddenly there's this new interest in Indian documentaries. In fact, it's funny because like the films that you mentioned were all from the same college in Delhi. And it's been a very interesting journey to see a lot of people show interest in Indian documentaries. And I think it's also because we're all trying to find our way and our voice in a way that doesn't necessarily fit into what is expected of us as documentary filmmakers, but we're trying to create our own voice. We're trying to play with narrative, with form. We're not kind of, conforming to this sort of gaze that is usually expected of a global South filmmaker, as they call us. So I think it was a matter of time where some of that beautiful storytelling that has existed, some of that masala from Bollywood, some of the talent all came together and started to get noticed. But it's not new. It's been around. It just maybe spotlighted now, and we're very happy about that, of course.
Sarnak, I'm curious about how the filmmaking process changed you, both as a person and as a director. And I because I think the nature of this film and the themes that it brings up are ones that, for anyone who's, paying close attention to the film, that raises these questions, and I think people are going to think about how they live their own lives.
I think it's changed me in more ways than one. This journey for me has been a spiritual awakening of sorts. Like I said, sometimes I wonder how my curiosity about this world has translated itself into an against the tide. I am amazed myself. I don't sometimes think I made the film. I think like I was led by the nose, and I just basically showed up every day. And I feel like this deep hunger that I felt, like as if you are not visible, as if you do not value. When you're in a country of 1.7 billion people, that often happens to you. You feel like you're invisible. I've stopped feeling invisible now. I've really, and in that way, Rakesh has been he's been an aspirational character for me because of this, because there's something in him I recognized which leads to finding joy in life again, and being able to be in the moment again. And of course, as we go down the line, there are ambitions. There are ambitions like, oh, the award cycle is on, and we've got to be on top, and we've got to do this. And I constantly remind myself, this film for me is a constant reminder of keeping things in perspective, celebrate the milestones. It's so
Stay
easy.
humble.
I still stay humble. I still fall into the trap. I still say, I kind of refuse to see the good things that have happened, to only look at the things that haven't gone my way, that haven't happened, the way I thought. And every now and again, I have to sit myself down and say, if you were in Rakesh's place, or if Rakesh was in your place, how would he be? And it's changed me in more ways than one, Matt, and it's hard to describe.
Well, I hate to bring up in that context the prizes that the film has won, because I don't want to make that as if that's the goal. So I'll bring it up in this context. The film held its world premiere at Sundance, where you won a special jury award for the filmmaking. I'm curious, maybe it could be a question for both of you, but Kaval, of how your sense of how the film has been received differently in other parts of the globe, Do you feel like certain elements of it or aspects of it have been picked up on by different cultures, if you will? United States, maybe something resonates more with audiences, or is there this universal kind of reception for the film?
I mean, I think you said it to yourself, like it is, there are some themes that are so deeply universal. And I think there is, of course, climate change in the situation in which this film is set, but the largest story and the themes of are you enough, and are you happy with what you have, or do you want to keep striving? What is enough? These are questions that I think transcend cultures and countries and race and all of those things. And I think it's very cool because Sundance was a completely different audience from what we've encountered in our lives. And the response there was we didn't know what the response would be going in. And it was amazing because you had people who were much older from a completely different life who were crying. There was a 14-year-old who saw the film at the Sundance Mountain Resort who said, I want to watch it again. We were like, what? And then, like we've had a crazy range of response, but I think the most important thing for us is that everywhere we went, the film has been able to move people, sometimes bring them to tears, sometimes make them really, really sort of emotionally reflective. And I think that's what a film maker can hope for. And I think Sarnik has been sort of going and meeting a lot of people, and every time it's like, people come afterwards and they say these really joyful, really, really amazing things. So I think that's been the most important part of this journey for us.
And Sarnik, just a final question. I'm sure many of the audiences now, we feel emotionally connected with Rakesh and Ganesh. So we'd love to know how they are doing and their families are doing.
Rakesh continues to fish. Baby Dharya has started going to school. He's 4 now. He's just, he was in nursery and he's just started school. So I'm super proud. He's had another baby who's named after me, and I'm the godmother. So yay.
Oh.
Ganesh actually sold off his boats and he's working with he has a corporate job now, where he works in the fishing industry. He's trying to work with policymakers in India. He works closely with the government. He's actually been using this film as an advocacy piece, because there are many, many, many readings of this film. There's the social reading, there's the cultural reading, the climate reading. And he's especially reaching out to think tanks, organizing talks and events, essentially to talk about how not just the police but other coastal communities spread across India, how to incentivize their sustainable ways of fishing for these small scale fishers. And actually the truth is, Matt, that industrial farming and industrial fishing is such a eyewash, because the truth is 70% of the world's population still fed by small and medium scale fishers and farmers. And whereas the industrial fishing and farming is basically depleting the resources, so that is a conversation we need to have. And that is simply because small scale is not incentivized anymore. So the aspiration becomes either to shut it, not follow that livelihood anymore, or move to a bigger scale.
Well, thank you so much to both of you, Sarnik, the director, and producer Kofal Pandya of Against the Tide. Thank you for being part of the IDA's FallDocs series. It's a beautiful film, and congratulations to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt, for taking out the time and talking to us.
My pleasure.